We have an exciting program here tonight. Earlier, we always ask the entrepreneurs, what is the biggest problem you have got? Well, after we make the products, we can't sell, hard to sell. Then we talk back and forth and saying that let's concentrate on the first 5 sales. Well, before you sell it, you need to be able to market it. So we thought, well, we'll have a great marketing speaker, and then the marketing speaker, after he sells, will have a salesperson who's supposed to close it. So, so I think we have an exciting program tonight on the marketing part as well as the sales. So on the marketing, we can listen to Jim Pouliopoulos. I hope Jim, I pronounced your name right. I'm bad in my Greek. Jim Pouli, sorry. Oh, thank you. I know Jim, but not Greek. I'm sorry. So basically, Jim is quite interesting because he is a marketing lecturer and director of the professional sales program at Bentley University. And you might think that he's really a business person because he's a Bentley University Corporate Immersion Institute and everything else. And he can transform innovative startup companies into ideas into reality. He'll have a lot of case studies which he's going to tell us. And he has 25 years experience. What's most interesting is that he's a graduate from WPI in BS Electrical Engineering. So he knows the technical part of it. And also he has a master's in engineering from Rensselaer. And he has an MBA from Bentley, I think, yeah. So basically, we have both sides, the technical angle which he understands, some of the people don't understand, and he understands the business angle on it. So he's going to go back and forth, and also he's going to give us a great presentation. I listened to his earlier yesterday, it was exciting. Jim, floor is for you.
So thank you everyone for coming out tonight. As Arm said, my name is Jim Pouliopoulos. Everyone calls me Pouli because no one can pronounce Pouliopoulos, so feel free to do that. I have some information here for you. I want to give everyone my contact information, and I want to give everyone a copy of my presentation. So if you send the word Pouli to that phone number as a text message, you'll get my contact information that will automatically get loaded into your address book on your phone, and then a few minutes later you'll get a PDF of my presentation via link. So it's a technology that company I've been working with called Kinect Up, and we're trying to get people to start using it as a networking tool. Next time, in September, Joe, here's what we'll do. We'll get everyone to install Kinect Up on their phone, and if everyone shakes their phone at the same time, we'll all get everyone's contact information on our phones. It's a very cool technology, right? So next time we'll do that. Anyway, so I am Jim Pouliopoulos. I'm the director of the professional sales program at Bentley, which I created about 1.5 years ago. Bentley University now has a program where students can graduate with a Bachelor of Science in Professional Sales. And I'm a marketing lecturer. I've been teaching there for 13 years and 3 years full-time, the last 3 years. Prior to that, I worked at IBM for 13 years. And I do have a master's degree in engineering and a bachelor's degree in engineering, WPI, RPI. I ran out of PI schools to go to, so then I went and got my MBA. I call myself a recovering engineer because I was in engineering for a few years and then I went into sales and marketing. So I have seen both sides of the coin, and one of the things that I like to tell people when I talk about marketing and selling is that basically marketing is a discipline, not a department. Although most marketing people have kind of painted themselves into a corner because they're not savvy about technology, they're not savvy about innovation, they're not good with the numbers, and so they're not often allowed to set the prices. There are sales channels that are already set, and so very often a marketing department won't try to break a sales model and create a new sales channel, and so the marketing folks are often left only dealing with promotional activity, which is a shame. Because I think, as a marketing lecturer, I think that marketing is everything that a company does. Identifying opportunity, figuring out what problem to solve, developing problems to solve that, developing products to solve that problem, and then figuring out what to charge for it, what's the value of it, how do you promote it, and finally, how do you go out and sell it. So my presentation will be a lot about the early part of your experience as an entrepreneur, but I want to start up by talking about Greek weddings. So 23 years ago, I had a big fat Greek wedding, just like the movie. I married someone who was not Greek, and so for about a year we planned this wedding. Now my wife is very detail-oriented. She's a project manager, she's a finance person, but she's also a fashion designer. It's an interesting kind of combination. And so as we were getting ready to get married, we went through the whole process of finding a venue and finding caterers and going to lots of bridal shows and talking to lots of vendors. And we used to run into wedding planners all the time. And wedding planners, I learned, all sound the same. They used to come up to me and say, we're a wedding planner. We're experts in helping the bride have a very effortless day, stress-free day of the day of the wedding. We have access to great venues. We know great photographers, videographers. We know caterers. We know bands. We will plan everything A to Z and take care of all the details for you. And we're affordable. Oh, they always added that at the end. And we're affordable. What you pay to us, you'll make up for it in the long run. Great. I didn't need a wedding planner. I was marrying someone who could have been a wedding planner. She was a project manager, like I said, and she was very good with the details. She made her own wedding gown, too. Designed and made her own wedding gown. So during the process of getting married, every time we made a decision, my parents had an issue with it. When my wife said she was going to make her a wedding gown, my mother, who's a seamstress, said, oh, you can't do that. Because my mother, the seamstress, was saying, basically, that's a lot of work. Why would you put yourself through it? When my wife said the bridesmaids were going to wear black, long, formal gowns, my mom said, they're not going to wear pink or purple? I said, no. And she said, what is this, a wedding or a funeral, right? When we said we were going to Australia for our honeymoon, they said, why aren't you going to Greece? When we said we were going to buy a puppy, they said, you never wanted a dog. It was on and on and on and on. We're going to have a DJ, why don't you have a Greek band? This was my life for a year, and it was miserable because of it. If a wedding, and here's my point about target marketing in your first 5 sales. If a wedding planner had come up to me during that period of time and said, we're wedding planners, but we do things a little differently. We work with Greek Americans who are getting married to someone who's not a Greek American. We plan cross-cultural weddings, and we serve as the lightning rod between the two families so that you don't have to deal with all of the conflict and all of the arguments and all of the hard feelings that you're going to have against your in-laws and against your parents. The only question I would have had at that point is, what color ink do you want me to write the check in? And oh, by the way, I would have paid more for that because it was a miserable period of time for me. That year was miserable, honestly. So that is extreme target marketing, right? It is finding a problem that people don't necessarily know they have or they don't necessarily know that can be solved. I didn't realize I had that problem that could be solved until years later as I was thinking about it, and I thought, why didn't anyone ever come up to me and say, we plan cross-cultural weddings? We deal between the two families. That would have been a great service, and I absolutely would have taken advantage of it. Oh, by the way, by doing that, that person could have found clients far more easily and far more inexpensively than someone who was just a wedding planner. Why? Because if you're just a wedding planner, you go to Chamber of Commerce events, you advertise in newspapers, you advertise on the radio, you're constantly looking and comparing yourself to every other wedding planner, and there's nothing to differentiate yourself against it. If you are a wedding planner who specializes at first in Greek American weddings, all you have to do is go to a few Greek churches, run some free seminars, talk to some couples that have gotten engaged and are going through sort of the pre-marriage counseling, and you will have more clients than you can think of. There's a Greek American newspaper. There's a church newspaper. There's a radio program in every major city like Worcester that has a large Greek population on the weekends where you could advertise almost for free. And especially today with social media, you could walk away with way more clients paying a higher price. I use that story just to kind of set the stage for what I really believe is your key to finding your first 5 sales, and that is extreme target marketing and understanding the problems that your prospects have that they don't know that they have. And that's kind of the premise that I have here. So this is a very old diagram that I took out of the book Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. If you haven't read it and you're an entrepreneur or you're in an innovative space, I think it's a must read. And basically all the different phases of the market for introducing a new innovative product are represented here. From the innovators, who are the people that will kludge together their own solution to a problem, to the early adopters who will pay a premium to be the first to show off this new innovation that they might have, to the early majority, which is really the beginning of a successful launch of a new technology product. As you look at each one of these different phases of the market, you as entrepreneurs have to understand that the chasm, which was introduced by Jeffrey Moore, it's a hole in the ground full of failed technology companies, because so many technology companies, so many startups focus on serving the early adopters, which ends up creating products and services that have no relevance to the early majority. And what I mean by that is, when you come across an early adopter, they are willing to spend a lot of money to have you take your core technology and customize it for their own use. They want to be first to market with the use of your technology, and they also want to, if they're a business, they want to have a revolutionary change in the way they do business. Walmart is a good example of that. They were the very first company to embrace RFID technology, which had a lot of issues in terms of getting implemented, cost a lot of money to do. I think if you would ask Walmart now, they'd say they did make some revolutionary steps forward in sort of inventory management, but it was a very expensive long-term process. I worked for a company many years ago. I was the director of marketing and sales at a small software company in Cambridge. We had a product that was brought out to the market. It was a software product for helping banks manage their staffing. And the way it worked was, a branch manager could say, I want my customers to wait 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes at lunchtime, but between 1:30 and 3:30 in the afternoon, I don't mind if they wait 10 to 15 minutes. He could set those variables in the software, and the software would then spit out a staffing schedule that would make him hit those service level requirements. We sold one copy of that piece of software. It was about a $500,000 sale to Chemical Bank, which was in New York City at the time. And they put it in a bunch of their branches. We charged them, I think, between $750,000 and $1 million in consulting fees and integration fees to make it all work. There were rubber mats in front of every teller. There were buttons that the tellers had to push that were specific to that piece of software to capture the data that was required, because you had to have some historical data to create the staffing schedule. Chemical Bank was overjoyed at the results. They were saving money. They were predicting how long customers would wait in line. It was a huge success for them. So my job as the director of marketing and sales was to go out and sell it to every other bank in the country. And what I found was, no other banks wanted it. And I was amazed, because Chemical Bank had made such great strides, such a revolutionary change in the way they did business, nobody wanted it. It came down to a couple of things. One of them was, banks are very conservative. They didn't quite believe all the data that we could give them about Chemical Bank. The second thing was, most banks are in that early majority, which means early majority customers want to pay, they might pay a little more, but they're not going to pay significantly more for a new solution. They want almost a guaranteed ROI on their investment. But more importantly, they do not want to kludge together a solution. They want a whole product, a whole solution delivered to them and sold to them kind of complete. The last piece is, they need a reference account before they make a decision. And the reference account, Chemical Bank, was not quite in line with what their strategy was. Chemical Bank was a little too, probably a little too forward-seeing and a little too creative for their taste. And so we didn't have a reference account. They didn't want to spend money. What they told us was, we don't want to spend $500,000 to have your software integrated with our teller software. We would rather go to our teller software vendor and just buy another module, which is your software. And so my recommendation to the company was, why don't we go and integrate our software with all the major teller vendors, the teller software vendors, and stop trying to sell this directly to the end user, the banks, at which point I was fired. Because the company really wanted revenue in the short term, and they had invested so much in Chemical Bank, they couldn't understand why another company wouldn't buy our software. A couple months later, I found out that my MBA professor from Bentley was hired by them as a consultant, and they paid him, I think, $20,000 to come back and tell them the exact same thing. A month after that, the president was fired, which I had great joy over, and that was the end of that product. It died. Why? Because that product was basically trying to be sold into an early majority market with an early adopter approach. and you can't do that. So when you look at the products that you have to ask yourself, how do I, cross that chasm? How do I make sure that I pick some strategic clients that will resonate with the part of the market I want to really do business with in the long term? And as you see this kind of, this matrix here, one of the things I want to point out is, in that early adopter market, you're basically doing a face-to-face sell. You're out there, the senior executives, the technologists are talking directly to the clients that would be buying the product, the clients that are willing to spend money on a customized solution. Once you try to penetrate the early adopter market, though, you end up finding that they want to buy where they currently buy. I was working for a 20-person company trying to sell software to Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and all the other major banks in the country, and they were basically telling me, you come from a small, tiny little company. We will never buy anything that critical from you. We will buy it from the major companies. And so we want to buy from where we currently buy. We want to buy from the vendors that we currently deal with. This is the trade-off of having a great new technology, but trying to bring it into a part of the market where you're going to have some significant sales. One way to kind of succeed here is what's called the bowling alley strategy. And I'll give you a couple examples here as well. But the bowling alley strategy basically is the way over the chasm. And the way to read this chart is to look at it and say, you've got a core technology, and you've got some application of that technology. So one example I'll give you is a company called SitePath, which a friend of mine, another WPI alumni, was one of the principals of many years ago. SitePath was one of the first companies that would take large multimedia files and cache them locally so that it would improve the performance of watching multimedia. This is before the internet was really as robust and as well developed as it is now. And so that first application of the technology was to move large files when the network wasn't being heavily used, so that when someone wanted to watch a training video, there wasn't a lag between clicking play and watching it. The first segment was the enterprise space. They went out and they captured 10, 20, 30 enterprise customers that did a lot of training, did a lot of internal communications, and needed a way of moving these large files around the system when the network was slow. They had some success there, but the analysts all told them the same thing. They said, that's kind of boring to us. We're watching this company called Akamai, and they're doing this content management and some of this really cool stuff with the carriers. If you guys could create a product that was more for that segment, it would be far more interesting to us. So they just basically took that content caching, and they moved into another segment. They moved into the carrier space. They captured their first $1 million business, $1 million order within months of making that move, and then a couple months later, Cisco bought them for close to $1 billion. And it was all a matter of starting in a small, tightly defined space, and then moving up to a different segment. The other way you could kind of view this, another example, is a company called AppNeta that I've done some work with. Their application, their sort of first go-around was a network performance management system. So you do a lot of SaaS-based software in your company now. This network performance management system would allow you to kind of see where the bottlenecks were in the network, even if you didn't own that part of the network. If it was Comcast or if it was your internet provider, you could tell where the bottlenecks were. They started off their first application doing network performance management. The segment was business partners that would go out and do consulting with enterprise customers. And they found that that market wasn't as robust as they wanted it to be. So they took the same solution and they moved it to another segment, which was selling directly to the enterprise customers. Right? So they went from one application, keeping the application the same, and selling it to the enterprise customers. They've recently now added application performance monitoring. So now what they've done is they've come down this way, where they've taken their technology and applied it to a different segment. Right? And so there's one of two ways to move in this bowling alley strategy, and one of the things I would recommend is don't move both ways at once, because your message gets diluted to the market as to what you really are. Succeed in one space or fail quickly in that space and move on to the next, into the next pin. I'm going to use more of a consumer-oriented example to kind of define this a little bit for you. But Bose made their mark in the personal entertainment space by creating these wonderful little Bose Wave radios. And if you've ever taken one apart, and if you're an engineer in the audience, you must have taken one apart, otherwise you're not a real engineer, right? And you look inside of it and you realize there are these tubes that just kind of run throughout the whole radio that are designed to optimize the sound, the audio waves that that propagate through the radio itself. That's what Dr. Bose created. That was his expertise. That was his first application of the science of audio waves to the segment of personal entertainment. Taking some of that knowledge, they then stayed with that same segment. They stayed with the personal entertainment space, and they created noise-canceling headphones. And pretty much everyone knows that the way they work is that they generate sound waves that are opposite to the sound waves that are hitting the headphones. So they created these noise-canceling headphones based on audio technology, another application in the same segment. And now they've got the wireless, the Wi-Fi-based headsets and so forth. But one of the lesser-known paths that Bose has taken is the following. Because they became experts in how to create great sound in constrained spaces, they approached automobile companies and said, look, you got a lot of dead space in your automobiles. Let's put some of these tubes in the doors. Let's put some of these tubes under the seats. Let's create these great premium sounds. And so they created a new space for themselves, a new segment based on their old application. And they created they had great credibility in that, and they've, you can buy, many of the luxury manufacturers now have Bose sound systems. An interesting offshoot now is that they've combined their noise-canceling headphone technology with their credibility in the automobile market. And if you've ever seen, there's a video online that you should watch. It's the Bose active suspension system. And basically, if you took the noise-canceling headphone and put it on its side, it reads the road and moves the tires up and down to counter any bumps and potholes in the road. It's the smoothest ride you'll ever see. Unfortunately, it's about $50,000 per wheel to implement. It's a phenomenal system. But what they did was they then created the following, which is it's a seat for long-haul truck drivers. The seat actually does the same thing as the noise-canceling headphone. And if you watch the video, they'll show someone who's in a seat that is not adjusted properly, bouncing up and down as they go over the road on the highway, versus the seat that is using this noise-canceling headphone technology where basically it's reading the road and adjusting the seat. Brilliant sort of step-by-step, market-by-market, application-by-application growth. iRobot's done the same thing if you look at kind of their progression. They started as a military provider and they progressed into the consumer world, and they continue to kind of make these little steps. So take your application, take a segment, succeed or fail quickly, move on to the next. But don't try to do it all. Just a couple more notes on sort of finding the first five. Every consumer and every business goes through this process when they buy something, when they decide to buy something. They have a problem recognition. I realize I'm thirsty, I'm going to go buy some water. Or I'm a high school kid, I've got to go to college. Or I'm an enterprise and I need some SaaS software to run my CRM system, right? So I recognize I have a problem. Then I go out and I look for information. And these days, everyone goes out and looks for information on Google and YouTube, and they kind of do their own research. Then I evaluate my alternatives. Whatever I find in my research, I come back and I take a look at it all. I make a decision, and then very often the link that's often forgotten by companies is the post-purchase decision. How do you engage the customer after they've bought your product or service and make sure that they're happy and they're satisfied? This 5-step process happens whether you're buying a bottle of water or building a $100 million building. It's just the speed and the depth that you go through when you make that decision. Here's the tough part for you today. The problem recognition, the information search, the evaluation of alternatives, and the purchase is very often done without asking a salesperson to come in and pitch to you, because there's so much information available for people. So you don't need, we talked about automobiles when we were having dinner earlier. The average consumer now does 30 or 40 hours worth of research on the automobile before they walk into a dealership, and the only reason they walk in is to do a test drive. And so that leaves very little for the salesperson to actually deal with, except for the following thing: to identify problems the consumer doesn't know they have, right? Because if I know I have a problem, I can solve it. I don't need a salesperson. But if you can come to me with information that tells me that there's something out there that I'm not aware of that's going to hit me, that I'm not prepared for, that's a value add. Information search, because there's so much information, good salespeople and good marketing people should be focused on not just creating good content, but curating good content that's out there. If you can bring to me and say, look, I know there's 100 white papers on network performance management, but these are the 2 that really get to the heart of it, and they apply best to your business. That's how a company can position themselves for greater value with consumers. And so for you, whatever your business is, ask yourself, what's the information that's most important that my clients understand? Smart first customers. Another great WPI sort of startup success story is a company called Dine up in Manchester, New Hampshire, started by a couple of WPI graduates, I think about 10 or 12 years ago. They started literally in their dorm. They do technology that enhances the experience for end users on on the internet. A lot of DNS-based stuff, and it works really well to kind of make sure that the customer has the best experience on a website. They looked at all the different industries that they might go after with this new technology, the key verticals, and one of the ones that they thought was most important was sort of this emerging company, this online emerging company in a few key segments like e-commerce, social media, and SaaS, right? Different segments inside of this emerging market. So they went and they targeted some of the growing companies at the time, which were Twitter, Zappos, and 37 Signals. And they captured them as some of their first 5 accounts. They spent a lot of time face-to-face. They went in very surgically. The battle was won, before the first meeting because they had done all their research. They knew what kind of issues these companies were going to have that they didn't know they would have. They went in, they captured them, and they captured them because, in some ways, they just wanted to be able to put the logo on the PowerPoint presentation for the next client. If it's good enough for Twitter, then it must be good enough for us. If it's good enough for Zappos, it must be good enough to us. And so those are smart first, and I think that's something that you need to pay attention to, which is to say, what are the kinds of clients that we really want to work with, and let's be disciplined in going and getting them. Let's not settle to just sell our stuff to anyone who's interested, because that's how things get diluted, like my example of the banking software. That piece of software was brilliant, but it was diluted to the point where it was unapplicable to all the other banks in the country. And it's a shame, because it would have been a great success story. Just a quick word on buyer personas, and I think John might talk a little bit about buyer personas, but buyer personas, now once you've identified the industry and the accounts that you want to go into, you have to decide and you have to do some research and find out who are the decision makers, what are the types of decision makers that are in here. Is it the CTO? Is it the VP of engineering? Is it an IT manager? Who are the people that are involved in this decision, and what are their motivations? Are they afraid of something? Are they in pain because of something? Or are they trying to gain something professionally and for their company? Marketing people need to do this work so that they can hand over this information to the salespeople, right? Don't make your salespeople figure this out on their own. That's not their job. Create a pain chain. And by a pain chain, I mean, if the CTO's ultimate motivation is professional gain because they want to be the CEO someday, then below them, they have a VP of network operations who is afraid of something going wrong and therefore needs to have a solution to assuage that fear. And below them, there's probably a bunch of IT managers that are running around in pain because they're getting called 24/7 with issues. That's a pain chain. And you need to have a response and an answer for each one of those links in the chain to be able to go in and have a complete, cohesive conversation with a client. So understanding the buyer persona is very critical in that space. And then sort of lastly, some of the questions you have to answer, you have to be able to answer are the following. What problem do you solve? What problem do you really solve, right? If you solve a problem and it sounds like a problem that everyone else solves, you don't have the marketing budget to generate the brand awareness to make people want to buy from you. You have to really understand what is the problem that the client has that they don't know they have. How do you do it? How is it different than everyone else? And the last piece, where have you done this before? This really speaks to the question of who are your first 5 clients. Your first 5 customers, your first 5 clients, your first 5 accounts are really going to be critical in terms of being a reference account to the rest. So I would say take a little bit longer to identify those accounts and go after them strategically so that when you are sitting in front of the next social media company, if it's Twitter and you're sitting in front of Instagram, you can point back to Twitter and say, they use our stuff, so should you. That's a much easier sale than when you've kind of broadcast your message over too many industries and too many different types of problems. It's really a very analytical process. You have the information. Some of it is just getting out and interviewing people. Some of it is just networking. And some of it is not always trying to sell your product or your solution, but just having conversations with people about the kinds of issues and problems that they face. So your first 5 sales, basically find them, create a target profile, and understand the buyer personas. Create some triggers and alerts. So when you're When you're following someone on Twitter and they complain about your competitors' products, that's a great time to be tweeting out something about that and capturing their attention. Face-to-face, relationship-based selling is most important during the first 5 sales. Once you do close those deals, they should then drive your marketing content, your sales kits. You should learn a lot through that process that will help you in future deals. And by all means, you have to find companies that you're happy and proud to have as testimonials and as success stories. I mean, otherwise, you need to leverage them from a very strategic point of view. Otherwise, it's not worth capturing them. Thank you very much. And I don't know, who do I pass it over to next? So. Back to Arm? All right. Questions?
Yes, audience, do you have any questions for Jim? Maybe you have your company, you want to make your first 5 sales? Yeah, that's a question.
So, can you hear me? Yep. Yeah. Over the course of the last, say, like 30 years or something, how's the values of your consumer changed? How does that influence your model? And does it change at all the difference between like where people fall in that standard distribution of who the innovators or the early movers or the early majorities are?
I think the curve stays the same. I think the ratios are still the same. It's still pretty much innovators, early adopters, early majority. The difference is, the last 30 years, is the amount of information available to the consumer or to the businesses making those decisions. And that's where the old sort of selling methodology, which was, caveat emptor, buyer beware, because the salesperson had all the information, that's no longer the case. Now the consumer has the information and usually has more. And so the model then becomes, there's a book that's out there now, which is a great book on sales. It's called The Challenger Sale. And basically it's a model where a salesperson is such an expert in the problems that consumers have or businesses have that they don't know they have, that they shock them into listening to them. And that's really what it is. When you say to a business buyer, your network is going to crash inevitably in the next 30 days because of the following things, if you can get the following reaction, I don't believe you, prove it to me. Now you've got an opportunity to make a sale. Whereas in the past, that kind of a statement was sort of a fear-based selling approach where you could kind of scare someone into buying it. So I think it's the level of information and the sophistication of the buyer that's changed. I think the curve is the same. We see it with, all the people that are lining up to get the iPhone 6, 7, 8, 9, those are the early adopters. They're willing to pay $500, $700. They're willing to spend 2 weeks of their life to wait in line to get it so they can be the first to it. Those people were the same people paying $2,000 for a DVD player a few years ago, or, the first 8-track player, I would imagine. I don't know.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Jim.
Yep.
Jim, you have the consumer. Consumer, you go and tell him that if you don't buy it within the next 30 days, nothing. He says, you can't make a call. He doesn't say, fine, doesn't matter. But you go to a business is very critical. So it's a different approach in both cases, versus a consumer versus a business. Because you went to, in the chemical bank, you're essentially selling on productivity, not fear.
Selling on...
you are selling on productivity. They said that you'll be more productive.
Right.
Yeah. But if you go to a business saying that, well, if you don't do this, your sales are going to decline so much, you'll be out of business a year, 6 months or a year from now. Yeah? And then this one will prevent you from doing that.
Right.
So how do you approach such a situation?
You have to be prepared for both. So the chemical bank example is a good one. Chemical bank was looking at it. There's only 3 reasons people buy anything: fear, pain, or gain, right? Yeah. Chemical bank was looking at it for gain. They wanted to have a strategic advantage over the other banks. Yeah. When we went to the other banks, we played the fear card, which was, if you don't do this, chemical bank is going to establish themselves as the leader in this kind of customer service. What was missing was, it wasn't a whole product. It wasn't something they could just plug in. And so you have to be prepared for fear, pain, or gain. And in the same company, you could have 3 different buyers. One was buying based on fear, one was buying based on pain, one was buying based on gain. And that's the pain chain that I talked about in terms of you have to understand each buyer persona's motivation and be prepared to address it. Otherwise, one buyer could veto the whole thing, which was kind of the case with the software that I was talking about. So.
Yeah.
Jim, could you elaborate a little bit on the post-purchase
Yep.
appraisal or
Yep.
activity that we should be doing?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here. One is the whole idea of appreciation, right? So from a very basic point of view, there's two kinds of appreciation, expected and unexpected, right? I walk into CVS, I expect that the person behind the counter is going to say thank you when I make my purchase and leave, right? If I don't get that thank you, I leave with sort of a negative sentiment to that company. There's the unexpected appreciation. I had my house power washed a few years ago, and lo and behold, it wasn't green. My house is actually gray, right? Thank God. Had power wash, and a couple days later, I get a letter in the mail from the power washing company with the bill and a before and after picture of the work. And it really kind of cemented to me the fact that this was a good decision to make. I see the difference, right? So if you're in a technology space, innovation space, your post-purchase behavior is basically to reinforce the decision that your client made. Don't just leave and leave them, hanging after the sale. Remind them of the ROI they're getting, of the difference in their environment that they're getting. 2 days after I got that letter with my bill, I got a box of cookies with the company's logo on it. So that was, again, sort of a second unexpected level of appreciation. And that was probably 6 years ago. To this day, I've never recommended another painter or power washing company except for them because of a stupid box of cookies. But you know what? It was unexpected and it was appreciation received. If someone expects appreciation and you don't give it to them, it's bad. Post-purchase, you got to show the client that they made a good decision. You got to help them understand that. They may believe that, but you just got to make sure that they really do understand that. Because what happens is if you're selling SaaS-based solutions or subscription-based solutions, if you're not continually reminding the customer of the value of it, eventually they're going to stop subscribing. They could eventually just pick a competitor who's lower priced.
Thank you very much, Jim. That's
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.